Lunch hour at boot camp was supposed to be routine. Trays clattering, jokes flying, rookies showing off. But when Lieutenant Viridian Thorne walked in wearing a clean uniform and a quiet stare, the room turned on her. 5 recruits stood up, blocking her path between the tables. One smirked, one laughed, another muttered, "Lost, sweetheart." She didn't answer. She just set her tray down. The tallest recruit reached for her sleeve. And that's when everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of hidden strength and unexpected heroes, consider subscribing for more. Some battles are fought by those no one knows to thank. The morning fog hung low over Camp Blackwater, shrouding the naval training facility in a pale gray veil. Through the mist, rows of recruits stood at rigid attention, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold dawn air. Among them stood Lieutenant Viridian Thorne, her posture impeccable, her gaze fixed forward. She was the only woman in the formation. Drill Sergeant Aldridge marched along the front line, his boots leaving sharp imprints in the damp earth. His eyes swept across the recruits, deliberately skipping over Viridian as if she were invisible. "Welcome to Advanced Tactical Training recruits," he barked, his voice cutting through the silence. "You were selected because someone thought you had potential. Someone was wrong about at least half of you." A few recruits shifted nervously. Viridian remained perfectly still. "By the end of this program, most of you will have washed out," Aldridge continued. "My job is to find out who doesn't belong." His gaze finally landed on Viridian, lingering just long enough for everyone to notice. She met his eyes without flinching, her expression unreadable. As the formation dispersed, hushed conversations broke out among the recruits. Viridian walked alone to the barracks, aware of the eyes following her. Admiral Knox specifically requested her transfer, one officer whispered to another as she passed. No explanation, just orders to incorporate her into the program. The female officers' quarters were small and sparse, separated from the main barracks. Viridian unpacked methodically, arranging her belongings with precision. Her uniform was pristine, but subtly worn at the edges compared to the crisp newness of the other recruits' gear. She placed a locked metal box at the bottom of her footlocker, covering it with folded t-shirts. The last item she unpacked was a worn compass with strange markings etched into its brass case. She studied it briefly, then tucked it into her pocket. From another compartment, she removed a small bottle of prescription medication labeled for shoulder pain. She swallowed one pill dry, then rolled her shoulder in a circular motion, her face betraying a flicker of discomfort before returning to neutral. At the training yard, morning exercises were already underway. Recruits navigated through obstacle courses, scaled walls, and crawled under barbed wire. Viridian joined them without fanfare, taking her place in line. When her turn came, she moved through the course with practiced efficiency, her movements fluid but controlled. Recruit Harlow Davenport, a tall man with sharp features and close-cropped blonde hair, watched her from the sidelines. His eyes narrowed as Viridian cleared a 10-foot wall with seemingly little effort, then deliberately slowed her pace to finish the course in the middle of the pack. "She's holding back," he muttered to the recruit beside him, Riker Quinn. Quinn, broad-shouldered with dark eyes, snorted. "Maybe she's just lucky. First day adrenaline." "No," Davenport insisted. "Watch her technique. That's not beginner's luck." For hand-to-hand combat training, the drill sergeant paired Viridian with Tavius Blackwood, one of the strongest recruits in the program. Blackwood had 6 inches and 50 pounds on her, his muscular frame dwarfing her compact build. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you," Blackwood said loudly enough for others to hear as they squared off. Viridian said nothing, her eyes focused on his center mass. When Blackwood lunged, she sidestepped smoothly, using a textbook defensive maneuver that redirected his momentum. He stumbled but recovered quickly, looking surprised. His next attack was more measured, and she responded with another by-the-book defense. Though she had clear openings for more advanced counters, she stuck to basic training responses. From his office window overlooking the training yard, Commander Winslet observed the session, his attention fixed on Viridian. He made notes in a classified file, his expression inscrutable. Viridian glanced up once, catching his eye briefly before returning her focus to her opponent. If she was concerned about the scrutiny, she showed no sign of it. The mess hall buzzed with conversation at lunchtime. Trays clattered, recruits jostled for seats at the long tables. Viridian entered quietly, collected her food, and found an empty spot at the end of a table. She ate methodically, her eyes constantly moving, studying the interactions around her. At the center table sat Davenport with his group of elite recruits, Quinn, Blackwood, Elson Forrest, and Zahir Kasparian. They were the top of their class, selected for the program based on exceptional performances and basic training. Their conversation was punctuated with laughter that occasionally shifted in Viridian's direction. "Command's gone soft," Davenport said, his voice carrying across the room. "Women don't belong in advanced tactical. This isn't about equality, it's about combat readiness." Viridian continued eating, seemingly oblivious. "Maybe she's someone's daughter," Quinn suggested. "Political favor." "Or a publicity stunt," added Forrest, a wiry recruit with calculating eyes. "First woman in ATT makes a nice headline." Quinn grabbed a dinner roll from his tray and tossed it across the room. It landed squarely on Viridian's tray, splattering sauce on her uniform. The table of recruits fell silent, watching for her reaction. Viridian calmly wiped the sauce with a napkin, picked up the roll, and continued eating as if nothing had happened. The lack of response seemed to disappoint them more than anger would have. As she rose to leave, her collar shifted slightly, revealing a small scar on her neck, shaped distinctly like a trident. Zahir, the quietest of the elite recruits, noticed it before she adjusted her uniform. That night, the recruits were assembled for a surprise night training exercise. They were divided into teams of 6, each given different coordinates to reach in the dense forest surrounding the base. Viridian was assigned to Davenport's team, along with Quinn, Blackwood, Forrest, and Zahir. "Here's your coordinates," Davenport told her, handing over a slip of paper. "Don't fall behind." Viridian glanced at the numbers, then at her compass. Without comment, she pocketed the paper and followed as the team moved out. 10 minutes into the forest, Viridian quietly altered her course, deviating slightly from the group's direction. "Hey," Blackwood called out. "Where are you going?" "These coordinates lead to the marsh," Viridian replied calmly. "The actual rendezvous point is northeast of here." Davenport's expression tightened. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying these aren't the coordinates we were given at briefing," she responded evenly. "You can follow me or not." The team exchanged glances. Zahir was the first to move toward Viridian. "The marsh is a dead end," he said simply. "I'm following her." Grudgingly, the others fell in line. 20 minutes later, they reached a clearing where an instructor waited. They were the first team to arrive. "Good navigation," the instructor noted, checking his watch, especially considering the incorrect coordinates some teams received. His gaze lingered on Davenport, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. On the return journey, the forest grew darker as clouds obscured the moon. The team moved carefully through the uneven terrain. A sudden crack overhead was their only warning as a large branch, weakened by recent storms, broke free directly above Blackwood. Without hesitation, Viridian lunged, knocking him aside with a technique that distributed both their weight safely as they rolled clear. The branch crashed down where he had been standing. In the brief silence that followed, Davenport stared at her with new intensity. "Where did you learn that move?" he demanded. "Basic training, like everyone else," Viridian replied, brushing dirt from her uniform. As she adjusted her sleeve, Zahir caught sight of unusual burn marks on her forearm. A pattern too regular to be accidental, too unusual to be explained by common training accidents. The next morning, the recruits gathered for an intelligence briefing. Commander Winslet introduced a guest instructor, Captain Mercer, a veteran with extensive field experience. As Mercer began his presentation on recent operations, he briefly faltered upon seeing Viridian in the audience, though he quickly recovered. "Today we'll be analyzing the Balakovo operation," Mercer announced, bringing up satellite imagery on the screen. "A classified extraction of personnel from a hostile region 6 months ago." As he detailed the operation, describing the challenges faced by the extraction team, Viridian listened attentively. When Mercer mentioned the team had been forced to change extraction points due to enemy movement, she spoke up. "Wasn't it because the bridge at the primary location had been mined 2 days earlier?" she asked. The room fell silent. Mercer stared at her. "That information wasn't in the official report, recruit," he said carefully. "How would you know that detail?" Viridian's expression remained neutral. "Must have read it somewhere, sir." Davenport and Quinn exchanged glances across the room. Zahir's attention was now fully fixed on Viridian, his eyes thoughtful. After the briefing, underwater training was scheduled at the facility's deep pool. As the recruits prepared their gear, someone moved near Viridian's equipment station while she was receiving instructions from an officer. Hands quickly adjusted settings on her oxygen regulator before disappearing. When Viridian returned, she methodically checked her gear as trained. Her fingers paused almost imperceptibly on the regulator, noting the tampering. Instead of reporting it, she continued her inspection, then donned the equipment. The underwater exercise required recruits to complete a series of tasks while managing their oxygen supply. Halfway through, Viridian's regulator began delivering air at an inconsistent rate, a potentially dangerous malfunction. Rather than surface immediately as protocol dictated, she calmly adjusted her breathing pattern and completed every task with seemingly impossible composure. When she finally emerged from the water, the medical officer approached for routine checks. He frowned at the readings from her vital signs monitor. "These lung capacity readings aren't possible for someone at your training level," he said quietly. "And your regulator was malfunctioning. You should be showing signs of oxygen deprivation." "I'm fine," Viridian replied, removing the monitoring equipment. "No need for further examination." She left the medical bay quickly, but not before Zahir, who had been nearby receiving treatment for a minor cut, overheard the exchange. That evening, Viridian returned to her quarters and locked the door. From beneath her bunk, she retrieved the metal box and opened it using a key kept on a chain around her neck. Inside lay the worn compass, her medication, and a photograph torn neatly in half. The visible portion showed Viridian in different clothing, standing alongside others whose faces were cut off by the tear. She performed a series of physical therapy exercises for what appeared to be a severe shoulder injury, wincing slightly at certain movements. Through her partially open window blinds, Davenport watched from the shadows before disappearing into the darkness to gather his friends. The next morning, Viridian checked her secure tablet and found an encrypted message. "Security breach confirmed. Identity compromise possible. Proceed with caution." She deleted the message and headed toward the mess hall for breakfast. As she turned a corner in the empty hallway, Davenport's group surrounded her, blocking her path. "No ordinary recruit could have survived that equipment failure yesterday," Quinn said, stepping forward. "Your oxygen levels never drop below normal. And that move you used to save Blackwood," Forrest added, "that's not taught in basic." "We checked the records," Blackwood said, moving closer. "There's no Lieutenant Thorne in any database before 3 months ago." Viridian remained silent, her posture relaxed despite being surrounded. "Are you a spy?" Forrest demanded. "Is that why you're here?" Behind her back, Viridian's fingers moved in a subtle pattern, almost like she was signaling someone. Zahir, standing slightly apart from the others, noticed the movement. Just as Davenport stepped forward to grab her arm, the mess hall bell rang, breaking the tension momentarily. "This conversation isn't over," Davenport warned. As recruits began filing toward the mess hall, Zahir broke away from the group and approached Commander Winslet, who had emerged from a nearby office. "Sir, I need to report something about Lieutenant Thorne," he said in a low voice. "What is it, recruit?" Winslet replied, his expression guarded. "I think she was signaling someone just now," Zahir explained. "And that move she used to save Blackwood during night training? That's SEAL Team protocol. My brother described it in his letters." Winslet's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think you know SEAL protocols, recruit?" "My brother served with Team 6, Zahir replied quietly, "before he went missing in Balakovo." Winslet studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Report to my office after breakfast, Kasparian, and keep this conversation to yourself." As they parted, neither noticed Admiral Knox himself, standing at the far end of the hallway, watching Viridian enter the mess hall with an expression of keen interest. In his hand was a classified folder bearing her name. The truth about Lieutenant Viridian Thorne was about to be revealed. If you've ever met someone who is underestimated or misjudged, let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and quiet dignity, consider subscribing for more tales of the extraordinary hiding in plain sight. What's your prediction for what happens next? The intelligence briefing room was unnaturally quiet as Captain Mercer continued his presentation on the Balakovo operation. All eyes kept shifting between him and Viridian, who sat with perfect posture in the back row. The tension from her unexpected knowledge about classified details hung in the air like static before a storm. The extraction team faced unprecedented challenges, Mercer continued, clicking to the next slide. Enemy forces had established checkpoints at all major thoroughfares, communications were compromised, and our team had to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. On the screen appeared thermal imagery of a compound surrounded by armed guards. The team infiltrated under cover of a sandstorm, neutralized threats with non-lethal means where possible, and extracted all 30 hostages without casualties. It remains one of the most successful Black Ops in recent naval history. Viridian's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen when Mercer showed the extraction route, a detail that didn't escape Zahir's notice. The team leader employed unconventional tactics, Mercer explained, using underwater access points that weren't on any of our intel maps. What about the minefield? Asked a recruit from the front row. Mercer paused. That information is still classified at the highest levels. But the team had to cross it to reach the secondary extraction point, Viridian said, her voice cutting through the silence. The room stilled completely. Mercer stared at her, his professional demeanor cracking for just a moment. That information wasn't in any official report, he said carefully. How exactly would you know about the minefield, recruit? Viridian maintained eye contact, her expression giving away nothing. I must have read it somewhere, sir. That's impossible, Mercer replied. Those details were compartmentalized. Only the team members themselves and the commanding officers had access to that information. Davenport and Quinn exchanged loaded glances across the room. Suspicion had just hardened into certainty in their minds. After the briefing, recruits filed out in uncomfortable silence. As Viridian passed Captain Mercer, he spoke in a voice too low for others to hear. Careful, Lieutenant. Your cover isn't as solid as you might think. She gave no indication she'd heard him as she walked away. In the corridor, Davenport fell into step beside Zahir, who had been unusually quiet throughout the briefing. You see it too, don't you? Davenport pressed. She's not who she claims to be. Zahir kept walking, his expression troubled. There's more to this than we understand. That's why we need to find out what she's hiding, Davenport insisted. If she's compromised the program, we deserve to know. Zahir stopped abruptly. My brother wrote about Balakovo in his last letter. He said they were walking into a trap, that intel had been leaked. He never made it home. The afternoon brought underwater training exercises in the facility's deep pool. Recruits prepared their gear methodically, checking and double-checking equipment as instructed. When Viridian stepped away, from her station to receive additional instructions from an officer, a shadow fell across her equipment. Hands moved quickly, deftly adjusting settings on her oxygen regulator. The culprit disappeared before Viridian returned, melting back into the group of busy recruits. Upon returning, Viridian conducted her safety check as trained. Her fingers paused almost imperceptibly on the regulator, detecting the subtle change in pressure. Rather than reporting it, her eyes scanned the room briefly before she continued her inspection, her face betraying nothing. The underwater exercise required recruits to complete a series of increasingly difficult tasks while managing their oxygen supply. 20 feet below the surface, Viridian's regulator began delivering air at an irregular rate, potentially lethal malfunction in deep water. Instead of surfacing immediately as protocol dictated, she adjusted her breathing with extraordinary control, completing every assigned task with calm precision. From the observation window, Commander Winslet watched her with intense focus, making notes on his tablet. Beside him, the training officer leaned closer to the glass. She should have aborted by now, the officer said. That equipment failure would send most recruits into panic mode. Winslet didn't respond, his eyes tracking Viridian's methodical movements. When she finally emerged from the water, her vital signs were monitored as per standard procedure. The medical officer frowned at the readings, checking his equipment to confirm they were accurate. These lung capacity readings aren't possible for someone at your training level, he said quietly. And your regulator was malfunctioning. You should be showing signs of oxygen deprivation, at minimum. I'm fine, Viridian replied evenly, removing the monitoring equipment. No need for further examination. I insist, the doctor said, reaching for her arm. Protocol requires full medical evaluation after equipment failure. Viridian subtly shifted her weight, evading his grasp without seeming to do so. With all due respect, Doctor, I've been cleared for duty, unless you're giving me a direct order to submit to additional tests. The doctor hesitated, aware that several recruits were watching the exchange. We'll schedule follow-up later, he conceded reluctantly. Viridian nodded and left the medical bay, but not before Zahir, receiving treatment for a minor cut nearby, overheard the entire conversation. As she passed through the doorway, she nearly collided with Admiral Knox, who had been observing the training session. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken communication passing between them, before Viridian continued down the corridor. That evening, Viridian returned to her quarters and secured the door. She performed a swift but thorough sweep for surveillance devices before retrieving the metal box from beneath her bunk. Opening it with the key she kept on a chain around her neck, she removed the worn compass and turned it over in her hands, tracing the strange markings etched into its brass case. Beside the compass lay her medication and a photograph torn precisely in half. The visible portion showed Viridian in tactical gear, standing alongside others whose faces were cut off by the tear. In the photo, her expression was different, harder, her eyes holding the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much. She set the photograph aside and began a series of physical therapy exercises, working through obvious pain in her shoulder. Each movement was precise, targeting specific muscle groups with the discipline of someone who had performed this routine countless times before. Through her partially open window blinds, Davenport watched from the shadows, his eyes narrowing at the clear evidence that Viridian's shoulder injury was far more severe than she let on during training. He disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps silent as he went to gather his friends. In the officers' quarters, Commander Winslet sat across from Captain Mercer, both men speaking in hushed tones, despite the privacy of the room. "How much does she know?" Winslet asked. "Everything," Mercer replied, his voice grim. "She was there." "That's impossible. The team roster never included any female operators." Mercer's laugh was humorless. "Official rosters don't always tell the whole story, Commander." "Then who is she really?" Before Mercer could answer, his secure phone buzzed. The message on the screen made his expression darken. "We have a problem. There's been a security breach. Someone's been accessing classified files about Balakovo from inside this facility." Morning came with steel-gray clouds hanging low over Camp Blackwater, mirroring the tension building within its walls. Viridian checked her secure tablet and found an encrypted message. "Security breach confirmed. Identity compromise possible. Proceed with caution." She deleted the message and headed toward the mess hall for breakfast. As she turned a corner in the empty hallway, Davenport's group materialized from adjoining corridors, surrounding her in a loose circle that blocked any easy exit. "No ordinary recruit could have survived that equipment failure yesterday," Quinn said, stepping forward, his broad shoulders tensed. "The doctor said your oxygen levels never dropped below normal. And that move you used to save Blackwood during night training?" Forrest added, his normally calculating eyes now burning with accusation. "That's not taught in basic. That's specialized training." "We checked the records," Blackwood said, moving closer. "There's no Lieutenant Thorne in any database before 3 months ago. You appeared out of nowhere." Viridian remained silent, her posture relaxed despite being surrounded, her eyes constantly assessing distances and angles. "Are you a spy?" Forrest demanded. "Is that why you're here?" Behind her back, out of their view, Viridian's fingers moved in a subtle pattern that Zahir recognized as a distress signal used by special operators in the field. He had seen his brother practice it in the videos he sent home. "Whatever you are," Davenport said, reaching for her arm, "this ends now." Just as his fingers were about to close around her sleeve, the mess hall bell rang, breaking the tension momentarily. Recruits began to emerge from nearby hallways. "This conversation isn't over," Davenport warned, his voice low. "After breakfast, we're taking this to Commander Winslet." The group dispersed, allowing Viridian to pass. As recruits filed toward the mess hall, Zahir broke away and approached Commander Winslet, who had emerged from a nearby office. "Sir, I need to report something about Lieutenant Thorne," Zahir said quietly. "What is it, recruit?" Winslet replied, his expression guarded. "I think she was signaling someone just now," Zahir explained, keeping his voice low. "And that move she used to save Blackwood? That's SEAL Team protocol. My brother described it in his letters before Balakovo." Winslet's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think you know SEAL protocols, recruit?" My brother served with Team 6, Zahir replied, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. Before he went missing in Balakovo, the commander studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Report to my office after breakfast, Kasparian, and keep this conversation to yourself. As they parted ways, neither noticed Admiral Knox standing at the far end of the hallway, watching Viridian enter the mess hall. In his hand was a classified folder bearing her name. Inside the mess hall, the usual morning chaos of clattering trays and boisterous conversation was underway. Viridian collected her food and scanned the room, noting the positions of Davenport's group at their usual table. Her eyes also registered Admiral Knox standing in the corner of the room, observing quietly. She found a seat at an empty table, her back to the wall, giving her clear sightlines to all entrances. She ate methodically, her movements economical, her attention seemingly on her food, but her awareness encompassing the entire room. Commander Winslet entered, spoke briefly with Admiral Knox, then both men took positions on opposite sides of the mess hall. Their casual stances belied the intensity of their observation. Zahir sat with his usual group, but remained unusually quiet, his eyes moving between Viridian and the commanding officers. When Davenport leaned in to speak, Zahir shook his head slightly, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Viridian. As breakfast concluded and recruits began clearing their trays, Davenport's group rose simultaneously. They moved with purpose, positioning themselves strategically around the room, gradually closing in on Viridian's table. She finished her coffee unhurriedly, then stood to leave. As she moved between tables toward the exit, Davenport stepped directly into her path, Quinn and Blackwood flanking him. Forrest circled to block her retreat, while Zahir hung back, clearly conflicted. The mess hall gradually quieted as recruits became aware of the confrontation brewing. "We need to talk, Lieutenant," Davenport said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "About who you really are." Viridian's expression remained neutral. "This isn't the time or place, recruit." "I think it's exactly the right time," Blackwood interjected, "before someone gets hurt because of whatever game you're playing." "We checked the records," Quinn added, stepping closer. "There's no Lieutenant Thorne in any database before 3 months ago." The mess hall had fallen completely silent now, all eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Neither Admiral Knox nor Commander Winslet made any move to intervene, their stillness communicating a deliberate choice to let the situation play out. "Time's up, whoever you are," Blackwood said, his voice hard. Quinn gestured dismissively toward the exit. "Lost, sweetheart? Special Forces is that way." Viridian set her tray down on the nearest table with deliberate calm. Her movements were unhurried, her breathing steady. "I suggest you step aside," she said quietly. "Or what?" Davenport challenged, reaching for her sleeve where Zahir had noticed the strange burn marks days earlier. "You'll call in your SEAL team buddies?" The air in the room seemed to compress in the instant before Davenport's fingers closed around Viridian's uniform. Time slowed, crystallized, then shattered. In one fluid motion, Viridian grabbed Davenport's wrist, using his own momentum to flip him backward onto a table. Trays and utensils scattered as his body impacted the surface, the breath knocked from his lungs. Blackwood rushed forward instinctively, but Viridian pivoted and dropped him with a precision elbow strike that found the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He collapsed to his knees, momentarily paralyzed. Quinn and Forrest attacked simultaneously from different angles. Viridian moved with a speed that seemed impossible, redirecting Quinn's punch into Forrest's advance, then disabling both with targeted strikes to pressure points only taught to specialized operatives. Zahir, recognizing the danger too late, attempted to restrain her from behind, using a technique his brother had shown him. Viridian countered with a maneuver specific to deep cover operatives, breaking his hold while ensuring he wasn't seriously injured in the process. The entire sequence took less than a minute. When it ended, all 5 recruits lay incapacitated, but not seriously injured. Viridian stood amid the chaos, breathing steady, completely composed, not a hair out of place. The mess hall froze in stunned silence. Food and utensils littered the floor where they had fallen during the brief but explosive confrontation. No one moved, no one spoke. Admiral Knox stepped forward into the silence, his footsteps echoing on the hard floor. He surveyed the scene with a measured gaze. "Who started this?" he demanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Viridian turned and executed a perfect salute. "They wanted to know who I was, sir." Knox studied her for a long moment, then removed a classified folder from his jacket. "At ease, Commander Thorne." He paused significantly. "Or should I say, Lieutenant Commander?" Murmurs rippled through the mess hall. Knox opened the folder, revealing her photo alongside medals and classified operation stamps. "You just picked a fight with the only woman ever to complete Navy SEAL training," Knox announced to the room, "and the officer who led the Balakovo extraction that saved 30 of your brothers in arms." Shock rippled through the room. Zahir, who had managed to get to his feet, stared at Viridian with dawning recognition. "You found them," he whispered, "when no one else could." Knox turned to Commander Winslet. "Have the recruits report to the main briefing room in 20 minutes. It's time they understood the real purpose of this exercise." As the mess hall erupted into chaotic conversation, Viridian's eyes met Zahir's across the room. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition deeper than words could express. In the hallway outside, Knox fell into step beside Viridian. "That could have been handled more discreetly, Commander." "With respect, sir, discretion wasn't an option anymore," she replied evenly. "The breach is worse than we thought." "How can you be sure?" Viridian's expression hardened slightly. "Because they knew exactly where to look for my scars, Admiral. Someone told them." "Have you ever witnessed someone reveal their true strength when pushed too far? Tell us in the comments below. If this story of hidden courage resonates with you, subscribe for more narratives about the extraordinary heroes walking among us. What do you think Commander Thorne's real mission might be? I'll rewrite and expand Part 3 of the story, following the same outline, but with increased length and more detailed scenes. I'll maintain all the retention directives while adding depth to character interactions and plot development. The mess hall erupted with the clatter of chairs as recruits scrambled to their feet, their eyes fixed on the scene before them. Lieutenant Commander Viridian Thorne stood at the center of the chaos. 5 of the program's top recruits incapacitated around her, her breathing steady and controlled, as though she had just completed a light warm-up rather than disabled 5 trained fighters in less than a minute. Admiral Knox's revelation hung in the air like thunder after lightning. The only woman ever to complete Navy SEAL training, the officer who led the Balakovo extraction. The room buzzed with shocked whispers as recruits reassessed everything they thought they knew about the quiet lieutenant they had dismissed and mocked for days. Scattered food and upturned trays littered the floor around Viridian, physical evidence of the brief but explosive confrontation. She remained perfectly still, the eye of a storm that had just passed through, her posture neither defensive nor aggressive, simply present and aware. The contrast between her calm composure and the chaos surrounding her only emphasized the vast gap between perception and reality that had defined her presence since arriving at Camp Blackwater. Davenport was the first of the 5 to fully regain his composure, pushing himself up from the table where he had landed. His face flushed with a complex mixture of embarrassment and awe as he straightened his uniform, fingers trembling slightly as they adjusted his collar. Something fundamental had shifted in his expression, the arrogant certainty replaced by a dawning humility. "Lieutenant Commander," he acknowledged, offering a crisp salute that contrasted sharply with his earlier contempt. His eyes, once dismissive when looking at her, now held a flicker of something new. Respect tinged with regret. Viridian returned the salute formally, her movement precise and economical. Her eyes held no triumph, no satisfaction at his humiliation, only the steady gaze of a professional who had completed a necessary task. "Recruit Davenport," she replied evenly. The other 4 recovered in varying degrees. Quinn and Forrest helped Blackwood to his feet, the large recruit still disoriented from Viridian's precision strike to his nervous system. Unlike their earlier bravado, they moved with newfound caution, as though reassessing not just Viridian, but their entire understanding of strength and capability. Zahir stood on his own, his expression thoughtful rather than chagrined. Unlike the others, his eyes reflected something closer to confirmation than surprise. He had suspected, perhaps known on some level, that Viridian was more than she appeared. The shadow of his missing brother seemed to hang over him as he stood straighter, watching her with newfound intensity. Admiral Knox surveyed the scene, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. His uniform bore the quiet weight of authority, the ribbons and medals on his chest, telling their own story of service and sacrifice. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the silent mess hall. "All recruits report to the main briefing room in 20 minutes, he commanded, the words dropping into the silence like stones into still water. "Commander Winslet, ensure the training officers are present as well." The mess hall remained frozen for a heartbeat longer, before erupting into controlled chaos as recruits moved to comply, their voices hushed but urgent as they filed out. Questions and speculations flew between them, the morning's events already transforming into the stuff of training facility legend. As the hall emptied, Knox fell into step beside Viridian in the corridor outside. The two walked with matching strides, a synchronicity born of similar training and shared purpose. "That could have been handled more discreetly." "Commander," Knox said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. There was no real reprimand in his tone, merely an observation. "With respect, sir, discretion wasn't an option anymore," she replied evenly, her eyes scanning the corridor as they walked. "The breach is worse than we thought." "How can you be sure?" Viridian's expression hardened slightly, the first real emotion she had displayed all morning. "Because they knew exactly where to look for my scars, Admiral. Someone told them." Knox absorbed this information with a frown, the implications immediately clear to him. "The trident scar on your neck. And the burn pattern on my forearm from Balakovo," she confirmed. Kasparian noticed both. Those details weren't in any file he could have accessed legitimately. They paused at an intersection of hallways, ensuring they were alone before continuing their conversation. "We'll discuss this privately," Knox decided. "For now, it's time the recruits understood your real purpose here. Some of it, at least." Viridian nodded once, her face resuming its neutral expression. "How much do you want me to reveal?" "Enough to establish your authority and explain your presence," Knox replied. "The rest remains classified until we identify all the players in this game." They continued toward the briefing room, their conversation shifting to logistics as they prepared to reshape the narrative around Viridian's presence at Camp Blackwater. Behind them, unnoticed in an alcove, Zahir Kasparian lingered, having held back from the departing recruits. His face reflected the struggle of a man trying to reconcile new information with long-held beliefs. He touched the pocket where he kept his brother's last letter, then followed the others toward the briefing room, his steps purposeful. The main briefing room was filled to capacity 20 minutes later. Recruits sat in rigid attention, the usual murmurs and fidgeting conspicuously absent. The room itself reflected the naval training facility's utilitarian approach, functional and austere, with no decorations beyond the naval insignia mounted behind the podium. The harsh fluorescent lighting left no shadows, creating an atmosphere where truth had nowhere to hide. At the front of the room, Commander Winslet stood beside a projection screen while training officers lined the walls. Their expressions ranged from shocked to speculative, revealing that many of them had been as unaware of Viridian's true identity as the recruits. Captain Mercer stood slightly apart, his face betraying no surprise, confirming he had been part of the deception from the beginning. When Admiral Knox entered with Viridian, the room snapped to attention, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor in perfect unison. Knox took his position at the podium, while Viridian stood at parade rest to his right, her posture impeccable, her face composed. She might have been a different person entirely from the quiet lieutenant who had endured mockery and skepticism for weeks, yet her physical presence was unchanged. It was only the context that had shifted, revealing what had been there all along. "At ease," Knox commanded, surveying the room with the measured gaze of a man accustomed to command. The recruits settled back into their seats, their eyes still darting between Knox and Viridian. "What you witnessed this morning was not a breach of discipline or an unprovoked attack. It was the culmination of an assessment that began the moment Lieutenant Commander Thorne arrived at this facility." He activated the screen behind him, displaying Viridian's service record. The achievements listed there caused audible reactions throughout the room. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and numerous classified operations denoted only by code names and dates. The record spoke of years of service at the highest levels of special operations, missions that would never be publicly acknowledged. "Commander Thorne is one of the most decorated special operators in naval history," Knox continued, his voice carrying both pride and gravity. Her completion of SEAL training was classified at the highest levels for operational security reasons. For the past 6 years, she has led teams in missions that officially do not exist. The recruits sat in stunned silence, recalibrating their understanding of the woman they had dismissed so easily. Davenport, sitting in the front row with his group, looked particularly affected, his earlier confidence replaced by an almost painful self-awareness. The screen changed to display satellite imagery of a compound surrounded by armed guards, the same images Captain Mercer had shown in his briefing days earlier. The familiar imagery now carried new weight, contextualized by Viridian's presence. 6 months ago, intelligence reported 30 naval personnel being held in the Balakovo region, Knox explained, his tone shifting to reflect the gravity of the situation. Conventional extraction was deemed impossible due to the political situation. The hostages included high-value intelligence assets whose capture represented a significant security breach. Knox paused, allowing the information to sink in before continuing. Commander Thorne volunteered to lead a team behind enemy lines with minimal support and no official sanction. If captured, the United States would have denied all knowledge of their presence. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the reality of such missions landing heavily on recruits who had only experienced training scenarios. "You all studied this operation in Captain Mercer's briefing," Knox continued. "What you weren't told was that the team was betrayed. Someone leaked their entry plans, compromising the mission before it began." Murmurs spread through the room like ripples in water. Viridian's expression remained neutral, but her eyes briefly found Zahir, who sat rigid in his seat, his face pale with an emotion deeper than surprise. Despite the ambush, Commander Thorne adapted, found an alternative route through a minefield, and successfully extracted all 30 hostages. Knox continued, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. But her team paid a heavy price. Of the 6 operators who entered Balakovo, only 3 returned. The screen displayed a team photo with 3 faces obscured by classified markings. Even with the redactions, the image conveyed the close bond between the operators, the casual stance of people who trusted each other with their lives, the subtle signs of shared experiences that created connections deeper than friendship. Commander Thorne sustained severe injuries during the extraction, Knox added, his voice softening slightly. She was hospitalized for 3 months and underwent extensive rehabilitation. By all medical assessments, she should still be in recovery. Instead, she volunteered for this assignment when intelligence suggested the leak might have originated from within this training facility. A stunned silence fell over the room as the implications became clear. Viridian had not been sent to Camp Blackwater as a trainee, or even as an instructor. She had been there to hunt a traitor. Her cover was intentionally thin, Knox explained, confirming their realization. "We wanted to see who would dig deeper, who would question her presence, and most importantly, who might react with inside knowledge of her real identity." All eyes turned briefly to Davenport's group before shifting back to Knox. The 5 recruits who had confronted Viridian sat straighter under the collective scrutiny, their expressions a complex mixture of embarrassment and dawning understanding. The 5 recruits who confronted Commander Thorne this morning were not the target of this operation, Knox clarified, his tone balanced between rebuke and approval. Their actions, while misguided, were based on observation and deduction, not insider knowledge. They demonstrated the initiative and attention to detail we expect from advanced tactical trainees, even if their approach was unorthodox. He nodded toward Zahir, singling him out from the group. Recruit Kasparian, in particular, recognized specialized techniques from his brother's descriptions and brought his concerns directly to command rather than acting solely on his suspicions. This is the judgment we expect from future officers. Zahir straightened slightly, his expression a complex mixture of pride and grief at the mention of his brother. The other recruits glanced at him with newfound respect, recognizing that his connection to Balakovo gave him insights they had lacked. However, Knox's voice hardened, the shift palpable in the room. Someone in this facility has been accessing classified files about Balakovo and communicating with outside entities. Commander Thorne's presence was designed to flush out this security breach, and as of this morning, we have succeeded. The tension in the room was palpable as recruits and officers alike wondered who among them had betrayed their own. Eyes darted between colleagues, trust suddenly a fragile commodity in a place where teamwork was supposedly foundational. The individual in question is currently being detained and questioned, Knox stated, offering no names or details. This matter is now under official investigation and will not be discussed outside this room. Speculation about the identity of the individual involved would be not only inappropriate but potentially harmful to ongoing operations. Knox's gaze swept the room, ensuring his warning was understood by all present. The silence that greeted him confirmed that it was. Commander Thorne will be taking over specialized training for the remainder of this program, he announced, shifting to a more positive tone. Her experience and expertise are invaluable resources that you have the privilege to learn from. I expect each of you to demonstrate the professionalism and respect appropriate to this opportunity. Knox surveyed the room one final time, his authority filling the space. That is all. Dismissed. The room stood as one as Knox and Viridian departed, then erupted into hushed conversations as soon as the door closed behind them. The revelation had transformed the training program overnight, shifting priorities and perceptions in ways that would ripple through the entire facility. As recruits filed out in subdued groups, Knox gestured for Viridian, Winslet, and Mercer to join him in a secure conference room nearby. When they had assembled and the door was locked, Knox activated an electronic countermeasure device to prevent surveillance. The breach has been contained, Knox confirmed without preamble. Lieutenant Rawson from Communications was caught transmitting classified information early this morning. He's being transported to a secure facility for questioning. Rawson? Winslet looked shocked, genuine surprise breaking through his professional demeanor. He's been with the program for years. He vetted half the officers in this facility, including me, which gave him access to everything from personnel files to mission reports, Mercer pointed out grimly, including details about the Balakovo operation and Commander Thorne's medical records. Viridian leaned forward slightly, her interest sharpened. Did he access the classified after-action report? The one detailing the extraction route changes? Yes, Knox confirmed, along with your injury assessment and the identification of the team members who didn't return. He knew exactly who to look for when you arrived. Did he give any indication who he was working for? Viridian asked, her mind already calculating the implications, the connections that might lead beyond Rawson. Knox shook his head. Not yet, but we found evidence linking him to the intel leak that compromised your team 6 months ago. Financial transfers through a series of shell companies, eventually leading to an account in his name. A shadow crossed Viridian's face, the first real emotion she had displayed since her identity was revealed. It wasn't anger or even pain that showed in her eyes, but a cold determination that transformed her features. Then we have the how, but not the why. That's your next mission, Commander, Knox said, placing a classified folder on the table between them. We still don't know if Rawson was the end of the chain or just a link. I need you to find out who he was working for and why they wanted information about your team specifically. With respect, Admiral, Viridian began, her tone measured but firm. My cover is blown. Everyone in the facility now knows my background. I can't operate effectively under these conditions. On the contrary, Knox replied, a hint of strategic calculation entering his voice. Your cover as an undercover operator is blown. But that was never your real cover. The recruits now know you're a SEAL, but they don't know your counterintelligence. Understanding dawned in her eyes, the pieces falling into place. You're running a double blind. Knox nodded, satisfied with her quick grasp of the situation. Rawson may have accomplices within the program or connections to external threats. Your new role as training officer gives you access to every level of this facility while maintaining your legend as a SEAL instructor. No one will question your interest in security protocols or your presence in sensitive areas. And the 5 recruits who confronted me? Viridian asked, her mind already considering how they fit into this new phase of the operation. They've demonstrated exceptional observational skills and initiative, Knox said thoughtfully, qualities that could be useful to your investigation, properly directed. You want me to recruit them, Viridian stated, seeing the Admiral's intention clearly. I want you to evaluate them, Knox clarified. Kasparian has personal motivation due to his brother's involvement in Balakovo. Davenport shows leadership potential despite his attitude problems. The others have specific skills that might prove valuable. If you deem them trustworthy, bring them in limited capacity. If not, keep them at arm's length while you continue the investigation. Viridian considered this approach, weighing the potential benefits against the risks. It's unorthodox to involve trainees in an active counterintelligence operation. These are unorthodox circumstances, Winslet pointed out, and their involvement gives you cover for activities that might otherwise draw attention. Who would suspect that training exercises could be intelligence gathering? I'll evaluate them individually, Viridian decided, starting today. In the locker room, Davenport and his group changed into physical training gear in uncharacteristic silence. The revelations of the morning hung heavily over them, each processing the implications in his own way. The familiar space felt different somehow, as though the truth about Viridian had altered even their physical environment. "A seal," Quinn finally said, breaking the tension as he shook his head in disbelief. "We challenged a freaking seal to a fight." "Not just any seal," Forrest added quietly. "The leader of the Balakovo extraction. That operation was practically mythical in intelligence circles." "We're lucky she didn't put us in the infirmary," Quinn continued, examining a bruise forming on his forearm where Viridian had blocked his attack. "Those moves were professional grade." "That's why she was holding back during training," Blackwood realized, his voice carrying dawning comprehension. "She wasn't struggling, she was hiding her real capabilities." "All those times we thought she was at her limit," Davenport said, recalling specific incidents during physical training. "The underwater exercise when her equipment malfunctioned. She wasn't pushing herself, she was restraining herself." Zahir remained silent throughout this exchange, methodically organizing his gear with the precision of someone using routine to process complex emotions. His thoughts were elsewhere, on a brother who had gone missing during the very mission Viridian had led. Davenport slammed his locker shut with more force than necessary, the sound echoing sharply through the room. "We were played. This whole thing was a test, and we failed spectacularly." "Did we?" Zahir finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear enough to draw everyone's attention. "Admiral Knox said our observations were exactly what they expect from advanced tactical trainees. After we made complete fools of ourselves," Quinn pointed out, gesturing to the various bruises and sore spots they had acquired during their brief confrontation with Viridian. "No," Zahir countered, turning to face them fully. "We identified an operator in deep cover with minimal information. We noticed discrepancies in her background, recognized specialized techniques, and connected them to classified operations. How many others would have noticed what we did?" The others considered this perspective, their expressions gradually shifting from embarrassment to cautious pride. "Besides," Zahir added, a new certainty in his voice, "she could have disabled us much more permanently if she'd wanted to. That was a demonstration, not a fight." Blackwood rubbed his neck where Viridian's precision strike had temporarily paralyzed him. "I've never seen moves like that, not even from combat instructors." "That's because they don't teach those techniques outside of specialized units," a new voice stated from the doorway. The 5 recruits turned as one to find Lieutenant Commander Thorne standing in the entrance to the locker room. They immediately stood at attention, a respect now based on understanding rather than just rank. "At ease," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority it always had, though they heard it differently now. She entered the room fully, closing the door behind her to ensure privacy. "I'd like to speak with you all privately." When they had gathered around her, Viridian studied each face in turn, her assessment penetrating and thorough. "Your observations about me were correct. Your approach was flawed." None of them could argue with that assessment. The evidence of their tactical error was still visible in their various states of dishevelment. "In the field, information is often your most valuable weapon," she continued, her tone shifting subtly to that of an instructor. "How you gather it, verify it, and act on it can mean the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death." She focused on Davenport first, the nominal leader of the group. "You noticed I was holding back during physical training. Good observation. But you assumed it was weakness rather than considering alternative explanations." Davenport nodded, accepting the criticism professionally. His earlier arrogance was notably absent. "Blackwood, you recognized my defensive techniques were not standard issue. Quinn, you correctly deduced my equipment had been tampered with during underwater training and were impressed by my performance despite the sabotage." Each recruit straightened slightly at the acknowledgement of their perceptiveness. "Forrest, you were right to question my sudden appearance in the program. Your background check was thorough, if limited by your access level." She turned last to Zahir. "And Kasparian, you recognize SEAL team protocols from your brother's descriptions and made the connection to Balakavo. That level of pattern recognition is rare." Her gaze encompassed all of them, neither condemning nor congratulatory, simply factual. "Individually, your observations were impressive. Together, they could have been powerful intelligence if properly channeled. Instead, you created a confrontation that exposed your intentions and eliminated any tactical advantage you might have had." "What should we have done differently, Commander?" Zahir asked, the question genuine rather than defensive. "You should have brought your concerns through proper channels," she replied. "Kasparian started to do this by approaching Commander Winslet. That was the correct procedure." She paused, then added something unexpected that shifted the atmosphere in the room. "You should also have considered that I might be an ally rather than a threat." The five exchanged glances, recognizing the deeper lesson in her words. In their determination to expose what they perceived as an infiltrator, they had never considered the alternative interpretation of the evidence. "In counterintelligence," Viridian continued, "assumptions are both necessary and dangerous. You must form working hypotheses based on limited information, but remain flexible enough to revise those hypotheses when new evidence emerges." She studied them for a moment longer, her decision apparently made. "Report to Training Field C. At Oro 600 tomorrow. You've been reassigned to my direct command for specialized training." The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the group. After the morning's confrontation, the last thing they had expected was special attention from the officer they had challenged. As she turned to leave, Davenport stepped forward, his movement deliberate. "Commander," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort, "I want to apologize for my behavior. It was unprofessional and disrespectful." Viridian regarded him evenly, neither accepting nor dismissing his apology immediately. "In the field, assumptions get people killed, Davenport. Question everything except loyalty to your team and your mission. That's the only apology I need from any of you." Her words carried weight beyond the immediate situation, speaking to a philosophy forged in operations where lives hung in the balance. Before any of them could respond, she continued, "O600 tomorrow. Be prepared for extended field exercises. Bring your full tactical gear." With that, she departed, leaving them to process both her criticism and the unexpected opportunity she had offered. The following morning dawned clear and cold. The fog that typically shrouded Camp Blackwater burned away by an unusually bright sun. The training field stretched out in the crisp morning light, dew crystallizing on the grass in patterns that would disappear within the hour. On Training Field C, Viridian waited as the five recruits arrived precisely at 0600, their breath-forming clouds in the air. They moved with heightened alertness, aware that today marked a significant shift in their training. Each carried full tactical gear as instructed, prepared for whatever challenges Viridian might have planned. "Today we begin specialized training," she announced without preamble, her voice carrying in the still morning air. "This won't be like anything you've experienced before. We're going to focus on observation, infiltration, and counterintelligence techniques not covered in the standard curriculum." She led them to a secluded section of the training grounds where equipment had been set up for scenarios they didn't recognize from standard training. The setup included surveillance devices, communication tools, and what appeared to be a mock-up of an urban environment. "The first rule of counterintelligence," Viridian began, "is that nothing is ever exactly what it appears to be. The second rule is that everyone has patterns and tells, no matter how well trained they are." Over the next several hours, she pushed them beyond conventional training, teaching techniques normally reserved for specialized units. She showed them how to recognize surveillance, how to communicate covertly, and how to identify behavioral patterns that might indicate deception. "Most people focus on looking for lies," she explained as they practiced observation exercises. "That's a mistake. Focus instead on baseline behavior, then notice deviations. It's changes in pattern that reveal the most information." Each recruit absorbed the lessons differently. Davenport approached the training with intensity, determined to prove himself worthy of the opportunity. Quinn's physical prowess translated well to the practical exercises, while Blackwood showed unexpected aptitude for communication security protocols. Forrest, analytical by nature, excelled at pattern recognition in data sets Viridian provided as practice. Zahir's personal connection to the mission gave him an edge and motivation. but his natural observational skills were what truly set him apart. During a rare break, while the others hydrated and reviewed notes, Zahir approached Viridian privately. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind. "Commander, may I ask you something about Balakovo?" he said quietly, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. Viridian's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes softened slightly, a recognition of his personal stake in the operation. "What is it, Kasparian?" "My brother, Lieutenant Rayan Kasparian," Zahir said, the name carrying weight as he spoke it. "He was assigned to support your extraction team. He never came home." A brief silence fell between them, filled with the unspoken weight of shared history. "I know," Viridian said finally. "Lieutenant Kasparian was our communications specialist. He was exceptional." "The official report said missing in action," Zahir continued. "Nothing more. My family has lived with that uncertainty for 6 months." Viridian was silent for a moment, her eyes distant with memory. When she spoke, her voice carried a gravity that transcended their current roles as instructor and trainee. "Your brother volunteered to stay behind and cover our exfil when we were ambushed," she said. "We were outnumbered, surrounded, with 30 non-combatants to protect. The original plan was compromised. Someone had leaked our route." Zahir listened intently, hunger for information, visible in every line of his body. "Rayan set up a diversion that drew enemy forces away from our secondary extraction point," Viridian continued. "He held position long enough for us to get the hostages to safety. His last communication was that he was moving to higher ground for better signal strength." She reached into her pocket and removed her worn compass, the one with strange markings etched into its brass case. For the first time, Zahir saw the markings clearly. Coordinates and a small trident symbol, along with initials he didn't recognize. She opened it, revealing a hidden compartment where a folded piece of paper had been concealed. "He gave me this before we separated," she said, handing the paper to Zahir. "Asked me to deliver it personally if he didn't make it back." With trembling fingers, Zahir unfolded the note. His brother's handwriting covered the page in a final message he had thought forever. Lost. The contents remained private as he read, but the impact was visible on his face. Grief mingled with something like peace, the closure of at least knowing the circumstances. "We never found his body," Viridian added quietly. "Search teams went back when the political situation stabilized, but the area had been cleared. He was listed as MIA because, without confirmation, without a body, there's always hope," Zahir finished for her. "My mother still believes he'll come home." "Hope isn't wrong," Viridian said, surprising him. "The intelligence community has unconfirmed reports of American personnel being held at black sites in the region. It's one of the reasons this security breach is so critical. If someone is selling information about our operations and personnel..." She didn't need to complete the thought. The implications were clear enough. "But he saved 30 lives that day, Zahir," she added. "Including mine. Whatever happened after, that truth remains." Zahir carefully refolded the note, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Commander, for telling me the truth and for keeping his letter safe." As specialized training continued over the following days, the 5 recruits who had once been Viridian's antagonists became her most dedicated students. Their initial resentment transformed into respect, then admiration, as they recognized the depth of knowledge she offered. Each day brought new challenges, from surveillance detection exercises in the nearby town to data analysis of communication patterns that might reveal insider threats. Viridian pushed them relentlessly, demanding precision and adaptability in equal measure. Davenport, in particular, seemed determined to redeem himself through sheer effort and discipline. His natural leadership abilities, once tainted by arrogance, began to mature under Viridian's guidance. She neither coddled nor punished him, simply expected excellence and provided direct feedback when he fell short. "Your team follows your emotional state more than your orders, Davenport," she told him, during one particularly challenging exercise. "When you get frustrated, they lose focus. Control that, and your effectiveness triples." He took the criticism to heart, working to develop the emotional discipline that distinguished experienced officers from promising recruits. 2 weeks after the mess hall incident, Commander Winslet called an assembly in the main briefing room. All recruits and training officers gathered, speculation running rampant about the purpose of the meeting. The room hummed with theories, ranging from program changes to disciplinary announcements. Admiral Knox entered with Viridian at his side, their expressions grave. The room snapped to attention as they took their positions at the front. "As you know," Knox began once they were seated, "we recently uncovered a security breach within this facility. Lieutenant Rawson was found to be transmitting classified information to outside entities." Murmurs spread through the room at this confirmation of rumors that had been circulating since Rawson's abrupt disappearance from the facility. "What you don't know," Knox continued, his voice cutting through the whispers, "is that Rawson was part of a larger network targeting naval intelligence. During questioning, he revealed connections to an organization that has been attempting to compromise our special operations for the past year." He activated the screen behind him, displaying surveillance photos of individuals none of them recognized. The images showed men and women in civilian clothing, captured in various locations that suggested covert observation rather than official photography. "These are operatives of a private military contractor known as Obsidian Tactical," Knox explained. "They've been selling intelligence to the highest bidder, compromising missions and endangering our personnel worldwide." The implications of his statement settled heavily on the room. This was no longer about a single security breach, but a systematic threat to operations and operators. "Commander Thorne has been tasked with identifying and neutralizing this threat," Knox announced, turning slightly toward Viridian. "And she has requested specific recruits to assist in this operation under her direct command." The room fell silent as Knox read the names. Davenport, Quinn, Blackwood, Forrest, Kasparian. Report to Commander Thorne for briefing immediately following this assembly. Shock rippled through the room. Never in the program's history had recruits been assigned to an active counterintelligence operation. The five named sat straighter, aware of the eyes now fixed on them, with a mixture of envy and speculation. Knox concluded the assembly with standard reminders about security protocols, but his words fell on distracted ears. The real message had already been delivered. The rules were changing, and 5 recruits had just been elevated to a status none of them could have anticipated when they arrived at Camp Blackwater. After the assembly dispersed, the 5 recruits reported to a secure briefing room, where Viridian waited with Commander Winslet and Captain Mercer. The room was Spartan, but equipped with advanced security measures, including signal jammers and surveillance countermeasures. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level," Viridian began, without preamble once the door was secured. "The security breach we uncovered is connected to the ambush that compromised the Balakovo extraction 6 months ago." She activated a secure terminal, displaying intelligence reports and surveillance photos that painted a disturbing picture of coordinated attacks on naval intelligence. "We believe Obsidian Tactical has been targeting our special operations teams, particularly those involved in high-value extractions," she explained. "They've been selling intelligence to the highest bidder, compromising missions and endangering our personnel." "They're mercenaries?" Davenport asked, studying the intelligence summaries with focused attention. "More sophisticated than that," Captain Mercer interjected. "They operate as a legitimate security contractor on the surface, providing services to corporations and some government agencies. Their illegal intelligence trading is carefully compartmentalized. What we don't know," Viridian continued, "is why they targeted the Balakovo operation specifically, or who they sold that information to. Lieutenant Rawson's interrogation has revealed some of their methods, but not their ultimate clients." "Why us, Commander?" Davenport asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "We're still in training." "Because you proved yourselves," Viridian replied simply. "You identified me when my cover was deliberately designed to withstand professional scrutiny. That's exactly the skill set we need for this operation." "What would we be doing?" Quinn asked, leaning forward with interest. "Assisting with surveillance, data analysis, and possibly field operations under my direct supervision," Viridian explained. "This isn't standard procedure, but these aren't standard circumstances. We need fresh eyes that our targets won't recognize." She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze assessing and direct. "This is entirely voluntary. If you choose to participate, you'll receive temporary field credentials and specialized training beyond what we've covered so far. If you decline, you'll return to the regular program with no negative impact on your record." The 5 exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that reflected their evolved dynamics over the past 2 weeks. They had become more than training partners. They had begun to function as a unit. "I'm in," Zahir said first, his decision clearly influenced by his personal connection to Balakovo, but carrying professional conviction as well. One by one, the others voiced their commitment until all 5 had volunteered, their responses varying from Quinn's enthusiastic, "Absolutely, Commander," to Forrest's more measured, "I'll contribute whatever I can." Viridian nodded, satisfaction evident in her eyes despite her composed expression. "Then we begin immediately. Captain Mercer will handle your formal briefing on Obsidian Tactical while I prepare the operational parameters." Over the next several days, the 5 recruits underwent intensive specialized training unlike anything in the standard program. Viridian pushed them relentlessly, honing their observational skills, teaching them surveillance techniques, and drilling them in counterintelligence protocols that went far beyond basic training. Their roles gradually took shape based on their natural aptitudes and backgrounds. Davenport as tactical lead, responsible for coordinating the team's movements in the field. Quinn handling physical security, his athletic abilities making him ideal for more active assignments. Blackwood on communications, his quick grasp of encryption protocols proving valuable. Forrest analyzing intelligence patterns, his methodical mind well suited to identifying anomalies in data. And Zahir serving as cultural and linguistic specialist due to his background and language skills. "Remember," Viridian told them during their final briefing in a secure room, outfitted with maps and surveillance equipment, "in counterintelligence, the goal isn't always to capture or neutralize the target. Sometimes, the most valuable outcome is understanding their objectives and methods without them realizing they've been compromised." She reviewed the operational details one last time, ensuring each team member understood their specific responsibilities. "We're gathering intelligence, not making arrests. Observe, document, report. If you're compromised, abort immediately and proceed to the designated extraction point." The operation was scheduled to begin the following week, with the team deploying to a nearby city where Obsidian Tactical maintained a cover office disguised as a corporate security consulting firm. Their mission was surveillance only: identify personnel, document movements, and gather intelligence without engaging. "We believe Obsidian still has contacts within naval intelligence," Viridian explained, "possibly within this facility, despite Rawson's capture. That's why this operation is compartmentalized. No one outside this room knows the details." The night before deployment, Viridian entered the mess hall for dinner to find it unusually quiet. The normal cacophony of conversations and clattering trays had been replaced by a subdued atmosphere that shifted perceptibly when she appeared. As she collected her food and turned to find a seat, she noticed something different. The central table, usually occupied by senior recruits, had been cleared of all but 6 place settings, arranged with a precision that suggested deliberate intent rather than coincidence. As she approached, Davenport and his team, now her team, stood at attention beside the table. Around them, the entire mess hall fell silent, every eye tracking this small ceremony that carried meaning beyond the simple act of sharing a meal. "Commander," Davenport said formally, his voice carrying in the silence, "we saved you a seat." The gesture was simple, but loaded with symbolism that wasn't lost on anyone present. The same mess hall where she had been confronted and challenged now offered respect and inclusion. The center table no longer a symbol of elite status, but of earned recognition. As Viridian took her place at the center of the table, the rest of the room stood in unison, a gesture of respect that needed no words to convey its meaning. Not fear, not regulation, but genuine admiration from peers who now understood the quiet strength that had been among them all along. Commander Winslet, watching from the doorway, nodded slightly in approval before addressing the room. "As of 0800, tomorrow, Commander Thorne will be leading a specialized unit on temporary assignment. Her team has been selected based on exceptional performance and aptitude for advanced operations." His eyes swept the room, taking in the recruits who would continue in the standard program. This is what advanced tactical training is truly about: identifying those with the potential to serve beyond standard parameters, challenging them to grow beyond their perceived limitations, and preparing them for missions that require extraordinary capability and judgment. The meal that followed was unlike any previous gathering in the mess hall. Conversation flowed naturally, the barriers of rank temporarily softened by shared purpose. Viridian remained her composed self, neither overly familiar nor distant. But those at the table sensed a shift in her engagement, a willingness to share certain professional insights that had previously been withheld. Later that evening, Viridian stood alone on the training field, where she had first demonstrated her abilities to the recruits who would become her team. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ground, turning the ordinary landscape into something more dramatic and revealing. The transformation mirrored the journey from misconception to understanding that had defined her time at Camp Blackwater. She opened her compass, the one that had traveled with her through countless missions. Inside the hidden compartment where Zahir's brother's note had been kept, she now placed a new list, the names of her team for the upcoming mission. The gesture was private, meaningful only to her, a recognition of responsibility accepted and trust extended. Admiral Knox approached, his footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. He moved with the measured pace of a man who had carried authority for decades, comfortable with its weight. "Your team is ready?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "As ready as they can be," Viridian replied, closing the compass with a soft click. "They've come a long way in a short time." "Sometimes the best teams are forged through adversity," Knox observed. "They challenged you, you proved your worth, and now they'd follow you anywhere. That's a bond that can't be manufactured through standard training." Viridian nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth in his assessment. They each bring something valuable: Davenport's leadership, Quinn's physical abilities, Blackwood's technical aptitude, Forrest's analytical mind, and Zahir's personal connection to the mission. "And they have you," Knox added, "someone who's been where they aspire to go, who can show them not just the techniques, but the mindset required for the work ahead." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last light faded from the sky. The training facility's lights began to illuminate, creating pools of brightness in the gathering darkness. "Some fight for recognition," Knox observed, echoing words from their earlier conversation. "The best fight knowing no one may ever know their names." Viridian nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "They've learned that lesson well." In the distance, she could see her team waiting by the command building, gathered for their final briefing before tomorrow's deployment. No longer antagonists, but allies. No longer doubters, but believers. No longer just recruits, but operators in the making. Their silhouettes formed a cohesive unit against the lights of the building, already moving and positioning themselves in the unconscious patterns of a team. "Commander," Zahir called across the field, his voice carrying in the evening air, "we're ready when you are." Viridian tucked the compass into her pocket and walked toward them, her steps purposeful, her mission clear. The path ahead would be challenging, the threats real, but for the first time since Balakovo, she felt the strength of a team at her back. Not just any team, but one forged through misunderstanding, transformed to respect. Suspicion evolved to trust, and challenge converted to commitment. As she joined them at the command building, Davenport opened the door, his gesture a simple acknowledgement of her leadership. "After you, Commander." Viridian nodded once, then led her team inside to prepare for the mission ahead. Whatever awaited them beyond Camp Blackwater, they would face it together, each bringing their unique strengths to a common purpose. The quiet strength that had endured mockery and suspicion would now lead from the front, no longer hidden, but revealed, not as a weakness to be exploited, but as a power to be respected. And in that revelation lay a lesson more valuable than any tactical training. True strength never needs to announce itself. It simply endures, adapts, and when the moment is right, it stands revealed through action rather than words. Have you ever discovered that someone you misjudged was actually extraordinary? Share your story of hidden heroes and unexpected strength in the comments below. If you value stories about looking beyond appearances and finding the quiet courage in our midst, subscribe for more narratives that remind us why we should never judge a book by its cover. What quiet heroes have you encountered in your own life who taught you the power of seeing beyond first impressions?